Howdy folks, and welcome to the annual War Thunder video, where today we're going to be watching the Phantom FGR-2 in the Royal Air Force flown for us by the Scottish Koala. That is a name which is probably going to be familiar to most people who watch air combat videos on YouTube. And those of you who do not fall into that category will almost certainly have never heard of them, and hopefully today's video is going to change all of that. This is actually going to be a fairly short battle, but I'm including it for two reasons. One, air combat missile manoeuvres, not something that you ever really see in War Thunder, at least not until recently, and something that people often get hilariously wrong based on their experience fighting aircraft that are not armed with missiles. And also there's just some fantastic teamwork in this battle between Koala and a friendly F-5 Tiger. So, do you remember when they first introduced missiles into War Thunder? Initially they were heat seekers, like the Sidewinder, or the Russian equivalent. And heat seekers are fire and forget missiles. You lock onto a heat source, you fire them, and then you may as well forget about them, because once they've been launched, you can no longer control where they go or what they do. Heat seekers are also very short-range missiles. They're dogfighting missiles, because it's very difficult to lock onto a heat source from a sufficiently great distance. But then they introduced radar-guided missiles, like the AIM-7 Sparrow, even the earliest versions of which had ranges anything up to 4 or 5 times the range of the best heat-seeker. But you see, the thing is, when you launch a short-range heat-seeking missile at an enemy aircraft, there's enough fuel inside the missile for it to basically be constantly accelerating until it either impacts the target or it doesn't. On the other hand, if you're launching something like an AIM-7C with a 22-kilometer range, or an AIM-7D with a 39-kilometer range, it's just not possible to pack enough fuel into something the size of a missile that can be carried by an aircraft and have it maintain constant acceleration all the way to the target. So how do you get your missile to travel that far if you can't just pack it full of more fuel in order to maintain constant acceleration, which of course increases the size and the weight of the missile, and that brings its own problems? Well, put simply, missiles like the AIM-7 Sparrow, once they're launched, go really fast, really quickly. The rocket motors in a lot of these missiles only actually burn for anything between 1.8 to 2.5 seconds, but in that very, very short space of time they can get up to speeds of Mach 4. They spend the rest of the time to target just, well, cruising and decelerating very, very slowly. And Scottish Koala is going to use what's known as a cranking manoeuvre to take advantage of that, while also ensuring to not commit the cardinal mistake when you're firing a semi-active radar homing missile and fail to maintain target lock, because these missiles are guided to the target by your aircraft's own radar. See, what he did there, and he was firing flares there just in case the aircraft he just shot down had managed to get close enough to get a Sidewinder off. But what he was doing was taking advantage of the fact that the missile is basically unpowered and gliding, although guided, on its terminal approach to the target. And a lot of people will just continue flying straight towards the target, which is the absolute worst thing that you can do, because if it's fired a semi-active radar homing missile back at you, it's it's being helped by your own forward momentum. So turning away not only increases the separation distance between yourself and any incoming missiles, but it forces that missile to use up all of that energy that it's stored up turning in order to try to keep track with you. The missile loses energy, and then it becomes much, much easier to dodge. Instead of hurtling towards you at a closure rate of Mach 4 or higher, the missile is instead, because it's been forced to maneuver, and you're no longer heading straight towards it, be reduced to an effective closure rate of Mach 1.5 to Mach 2, which is significantly easier for you to dodge. And not only that, because you are now separating from the target aircraft that has locked you up with its own semi-active radar-guided missile, yours is going to hit him first. And it's a semi-active radar-guided missile. It doesn't actually have its own onboard radar, it just has a passive radar detector. It is essentially riding the radar beam from the launch aircraft towards the target, you. And if you can break the radar lock maintained on you by the aircraft launching missiles back at you by separating the distance and getting out of the tracking arc of his radar gimbals, or shooting him down, which is very likely to happen if you're separating and he isn't, well, getting shot down tends to turn the radar off. So his guided missile very quickly becomes an unguided rocket and isn't going to hit anything other than the ground. Scottish Koala racking up his second kill there using a Sidewinder and taking down an enemy F4F. Friendly FGR2 down there in a lot of trouble with a pair of F5 Tigers on his tail. But yeah, this simple cranking manoeuvre that you've just watched Scottish Koala perform massively increases your chances of getting them before they get you, killing their radar and rendering their counter shot ineffective, or putting so much separation between yourself and the incoming missile that it just bleeds all of its potential energy away trying to track you, becoming much easier to dodge. Koala closing in with... Whoa, was that a... Okay. That was a Sidewinder fired from the front. And the most advanced variation of the Sidewinder found on this version of the Phantom is the AIM-9G, which is a rear aspect heat seeker. It's not impossible to hit an enemy target from the front, it's just extremely unlikely. I suppose he's got so many Sidewinders and there are so few enemy aircraft left that why not? But look at this. It's like watching poetry in motion. See how he was dueling with the enemy F4E there, setting him up for his teammate in the F5 Tiger. Because, I mean, a Phantom versus a Phantom, and these are obviously two different variations on the Phantom, with the Royal Air Force Phantom that Scottish Koala is flying being the heaviest and most powerful of the Phantoms that were ever built, thanks to their Rolls-Royce engines. But Phantom v Phantom engagements are usually pretty even duels, with the outcome decided by pilot skill, until you throw a wingman into the equation. Once it becomes a 2 versus 1 fight, well, it's not impossible for the one to win, but they need to be either flying a vastly superior aircraft or be a vastly superior pilot, or both, and that was not the case here. Remember, kids, never underestimate the importance of teamwork. At the very least, it gives the enemy something to shoot at that isn't you. But yeah, this cranking manoeuvre is so simple and yet so effective that Scottish Koala doesn't even bother taking a 20mm gun pod into battle on his Phantom anymore. He goes with all missile loadouts, which is kind of amusing given how terrible the reputation of the AIM-7 Sparrow was when it was first introduced into War Thunder, which is kind of appropriate because it had terrible reputation when it was first introduced into service in Vietnam as well, but for completely different reasons. People were complaining that it was impossible to shoot anything down with these new AIM-7 Sparrow missiles, because people didn't understand the difference between an active radar homing missile like the AMRAAM and a semi-active radar homing missile like the AIM-7. Although, to be completely fair to War Thunder players, it wasn't like Gaijin went out of their way to educate people about the difference when they launched this missile into the game. So people were failing to maintain continuous radar lock right up until the point of impact, which the AIM-7 Sparrow relies on because it doesn't have its own onboard radar. It uses the radar on your aircraft. Which is why, when you saw Scottish Koala executing the crank manoeuvre right after he'd launched his first Sparrow, he wasn't doing an aggressive crank manoeuvre, pulling a 90-degree turn and just rocketing straight away from his opponent, because then he would have lost radar lock. He had to keep his opponent inside the tracking cone of his radar, while at the same time trying to get as much separation as possible. And of course, when the Sparrow was first introduced, people just weren't doing that, either because they didn't know they were supposed to do that, or they couldn't maintain target lock because they suddenly had a bandit on their 6. And this was a problem with the actual Sparrow missile during the Vietnam War as well, because you had to queue the target up on your radar for a minimum of 5 seconds before a lock could be obtained. And then it required 10 to 20 seconds to reach a target within visual range, or 20 to 40 seconds to reach a target at beyond visual range distances. And this was a problem, because the US Air Force had this 9-second rule, which basically meant that if you were flying the same course and speed for 9 seconds or more, there was a very good chance you were going to get shot down. So, yeah, the Sparrow didn't do very well. It only had a 10% success rate. Koala trying to get the last enemy F5 with one of his Sidewinders, but it's missed. And he is overshooting, but don't worry, this is planned. Enemy Tiger turning to engage, while Koala rams open the afterburner, and the friendly Tiger swoops in on the tail of the bandit. and gets the kill. So, if the Sparrow was so ineffective, why do we still use it? Well, first of all, radar and electronics technology has moved on quite a bit in the 70 years since the Vietnam War. And the modern versions of the Sparrow are also faster, so it doesn't require that you keep the target locked up prior to launch for as long, and you don't have to keep the target locked up for as long after launch. Also, it's a lot cheaper because it doesn't have a complicated and expensive onboard active radar tracker which you are throwing away every time you launch the missile. So yeah, something like the AIM-120 AMRAAM is a much more effective missile, but those things cost serious amounts of dollar. The Sparrow does not, and it still works. In particular, the naval version, which is used as a surface-to-air missile, because a warship has absolutely no problems whatsoever tracking, locking and engaging multiple targets with multiple Sparrows at the same time. Anyway, that was theScottishKoala, link in the video description to his own YouTube channel down below, demonstrating not just the value of teamwork but also the effective use of the crank maneuver in air-to-air missile combat. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned something, and as always, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.